This is Codden. He's a good pawn. We like this pawn.
Oh, thank you.
This is Pain. This is a bad pawn. This is what we do with bad pawns.
No, please, I have a family!
But don't worry, I'm here to make sure that you'll never have to throw out the garbage ever again. Hello, my fellow Arisen, and welcome to Dragons Dogma 2. I hope you are enjoying your journey. I also hope you're going to enjoy it a little bit more after today, because we're going to talk pawns, how to have the best pawns, the best setup, and generally make your adventure just that much not easier, but more fun as well. Because there's a lot of trips, mistakes, easy to fall into traps that can make everything just a little bit more frustrating than it needs to be when it comes to your choice of pawn vocation, and perhaps more importantly, composition across the four of you as a full-on adventuring party. Now don't get me wrong, choose whatever you like anywhere on anyone, because ultimately it's your experience and I want you to have the one that you want to have. But I do think there is some sort of important, let's call them guidelines, a rule set that I would heartily recommend you follow, because it really will make a positive difference. Now, I'm not about to sit here and go, trust me, alright, you want to take these 3 pawns with these 3 vocations, look for these set of skills, and they will synergize and they'll just one-shot everything, because it's kind of boring and not really what you want on your first playthrough. Don't get me wrong, you can certainly go down that route. You can get a load of sorcerer pawns all incanting in sync, throwing out maelstroms and decimating everything, but not only is that more of an endgame, or at least later game setup, it's very equipment based. You have to really build around it, you have to know how to play with it. It's not just a sort of set it and forget it. The same as if you go a little bit warrior combo-y and start chaining ladder launches so each of them throws the other at the enemy for their powerful charged attacks and ridiculous grappling damage in a kind of hup team effort. It's really fun and certainly something worth considering later on, not this one specifically, but, you know, specific vocation skill synergy tactics, but in the general sense, that's not the goal of today. Today I want to make sure, or at least convey, after my hundreds of hours in this game, what really is kind of the way to go when it comes to your pawns, and as I said, that composition. So, first and foremost, there are a couple things. Your pawns are divided into 2 real categories. Your extra 3rd and 4th pawn that are locked to both the level you get them at and the equipment and skills that they have and are set by whoever they are when you find them in the rift. Then you have your main pawn that you can customize fully with both its equipment, its vocation, and the skills and augments and so on and such forth chosen within that vocation. This means that we want our 3 and 4 bonus pawns to need the least amount of our input and customization possible to still be effective, and it means we want our personal main pawn to be something that is going to gain a lot from us being able to micromanage everything that it is and everything that it does. So as we know, pawns can't be 4 of the 6 vocations, that being trickster, mystic, spearhand, magic archer, and warfarer. So they have to be selected from the 4 basics, thief, mage, archer, fighter, and then the 2 advanced in sorcerer and warrior. So this kind of limits our options when it comes to your extra free fighters, and does mean if you want one of those hybrids, well, you have to be it yourself as the Arisen. That said, every vocation is powerful and viable in its own right, so you don't need to let that guide you too much. That said, warrior and sorcerer specifically on your main pawn is a very, very good choice. The reason being is that they both do an absolutely metric ton of damage, and both benefit massively from you being able to choose its skill loadout, its equipment, and all of that. So having that actual micro control over your main pawn in these two vocations is going to give you a lot of bang for your buck over taking someone else's random sorcerer and hoping they, to put it frankly, know what they're doing with that said vocation. Then we have the Mage. This needs a special talking to, because essentially every single party should have a mage. There are a few exceptions, like if you're doing a particular cheese strat or some sort of silly combination or stacking again like 4 sorcerers, but in general, have a mage. If you're not it, have it as one of your pawns. It is night and day, and if you take one thing away from this video, be it that you want a mage on your team. And the reason for that is that they have 3 indispensable bits of utility that completely change your experience. The first is healing. They can pump it out in multiple forms, in multiple ways, and it's very effective. Yes, they can't heal up past your new max health as you take damage, but nothing can. That's not really an issue. Then they can also augment that by putting shields on everything. That is phenomenal. It starts off only being able to put it on yourself, but then eventually you can put the shield on all of your team, and that can tank some serious hits for you. Past that, you've got weapon boons. The ability to coat your team's weapons in an elemental affinity that hopefully matches the weakness of what you're facing. But even if it doesn't, it's a huge boost to your damage to have that boon on. Then they do have access to a lot of very useful just actual skills, like your nice, simple, yet deadly effective flagration, which will set enemies on fire, which does a lot of damage, but more importantly CCs them as they flail about, trying to douse themselves. And I can tell you, very, very much, every time I set out without a mage covering these bases, it felt notably worse, notably weaker, and I went back very quickly to add one to your ranks. It's very much a comfortable choice that will make your entire playthrough, well, just that, so much more comfortable. And when we look at your ideal mage pawn, something very much jumps out. You don't really need to be able to kinda tinker with a mage pawn. We're not needing it for damage, so its equipment and level isn't that big of a deal, so hiring it from a 3rd or 4th slot from someone else's from the Rift Pool makes a lot of sense. It's kind of wasted on you and your main pawn. It's ironic, really, that it's so potent, useful, and powerful, yet it kind of is a set and forget, which makes it perfect for your extras. So in that sense, the perfect mage pawn, and therefore perfect pawn to take up slot 3 or 4, is this. The Mage Vocation, yes, and then the following skills. You want High Palladium to give yourself and your allies shields. You want Argent Succor, which is a massive heal on single target. Or you want the AoE stop all debuffs, clear poisons, and sleep and paralysis, and that kind of thing. Then you want a boon of choice. Fire is generally just the universal best to have without knowing what enemy you're going to face, as it does set people on fire, and again, that makes them flail around, and it does a really good chunk of damage. And then just High Flagration to have a little bit of offensive contribution, but one that is meaningful in that, yes, for the 3rd time, it CCs enemies, and the actual raw dot damage of being on fire is very strong, irrelevant of the mage's equipment. So finding a pawn with these 4 mage skills you're kind of done forever. Yes, update the level of them to match you slowly as you go through the game, but generally speaking, this by itself will be the single greatest thing you can bring, giving you a lot more freedom to do essentially anything else with your other 3 slots. Except for the fact that there is still one key role left to fill. Out of 4 members of your party, 1 should be a support, which is Mage. Another should be a frontliner that is very hard to kill, which basically means you want a fighter or a warrior. Without a fighter or a warrior, you will find it much more annoying to actually do what you want to do, which is use your cool skills and have fun doing a load of damage on your vocation. Yes, if you are the warrior or the fighter, you're good to go. But if you are essentially any other vocation, having a warrior and fighter there will just let you play in a much freer way than you would otherwise, especially if, like me, you are a sorcerer. Because you'll be incanting, it's faster in Dragons Dogma 2 mostly, but still, it's a very kind of slow, methodical vocation, and if you're constantly getting hit and constantly getting cancelled, it's just really irritating. So when you have either a warrior or a fighter, you have a pawn that's just not going to die hardly ever, which is really good, but then you have things like your raw that taunts enemies, makes them attack the warrior, and you can just sit at the back blasting them or sit behind them stabbing them if you are melee. I really cannot express how much of a difference it makes. And essentially, once you have got mage and warrior or fighter covered, you are good to make the other 2, you and the final pawn, anything that you want. Unless you, again, are the warrior and the fighter, in which case you can make the other 2 pawns anything that you want. And the 2 certainly do have different pros and cons. The fighter is a little bit sturdier, but contributes a lot less damage, and the warrior really does contribute a lot of damage. If you want your frontliner to be a fighter, I recommend it being one of the extra pawns, pawns number 3 or 4, and then you've just got your mage, your fighter as your extras, and then you and your main pawn doing the damage, being able to be customized and controlled by you more directly. If you want your warrior, then I really do recommend it being your actual main pawn if you are playing a ranged vocation yourself personally. If you are playing melee, then I would recommend your main pawn takes the sorcerer role for the purest amount of damage it can deal. You see, ironically, the least useful thing that pawns 3 and 4 that you can't control, that are other people's that are extra bring, is damage. Yes, in certain situations, they will bring a lot of it, and yes, if you happen to get someone's pawn who is perfectly crafted as a death-dealing machine, then sure. But generically speaking, if you are grabbing the right mix of vocations to just be on your way as you go through the game, especially early when people's pawns won't be perfectly crafted death-dealing machines, what you want from those extra 3 and 4 pawns is utility filled in that you kind of need to have to really smooth things out. Because if you're rolling around as like a thief, archer, then a sorcerer, and like mystic spearhand, you are just going to get absolutely rolled over by any big creature that does meaningful damage, especially one that can spout lots of area damage too, and you're just gonna get folded. You'll kill it very quick, but you probably won't live long enough to do so. So as a general rule, you want to always have a mage and a fighter or warrior, and what they have specifically, the equipment that they're using, the skills that they have. While there is ideal ones, you mainly just need the vocation stood there, and then it lets you and your main pawn do any given thing that you want with those 2 big gaping holes filled in. As a general kind of overview, this is how I would look at it. For standard party comps that will get the best results based on what you as the Arisen is. So a melee DPS would be the warrior or the thief or the mystic spearhand, and the ranged, you've got your sorcerer, you've got your archer, your magic archer, your trickster to an extent, though that's a bit more of a wild card. Warfarer obviously can be either and both, and then if you, the Arisen, want to play that warrior fighter role, and then finally if you, the Arisen, want to play that support mage role. And if you generally follow that, you are in for an absolute treat of a time. And of course, as I said at the start, yes, there is various combinations of vocations, skills, pawns that you can do that produce some hilarious and effective and fun results, and we will be bringing you those. But right now, what is best is a foundation of the best layout of these vocations along with your pawns to just get the job done and progress smoothly in a way that isn't kind of going to end up irritating you because you just seem to get crushed in fights and perhaps you're not sure exactly why that is. You need a mage to cover your boons, your healing, and keeping everyone going. And you need a fighter and a warrior to be hit a lot so that everyone else can do the stabbing a lot. Don't try and get damage from your third and fourth pawns. Ideally, make you and your main pawn the damage because you can choose yours and his or hers, etc. armor, skills, weapons, and general playstyle to actually work together. Then I do just want to touch on the actual personality that you want to think about giving your pawn. At the vendor here in the main pawn guild in the capital city, you can get these, the kind-hearted, calm, simple, straightforward. You chose them when you created your main pawn, but it should be said that these do affect things. Generally, if you have a mage and you want it to support you maximum, give it kind-hearted. It will make it inclined towards looking after you as best as it can. If you have a good old, like, warrior that's full damage, kind of give it straightforward and it will just go kill things. Every single thing has its strength and weakness here, but don't think just because kind-hearted is support-focused that you can't give it to damage. For example, my cotton here is a kind-hearted cotton, not just because it best represents him, but because it works surprisingly well. You see, he is a warrior, but he is also filling in for that taking aggression and not dying, and I want to be in control of that. I want to be able to give him the right gear for it. I want him to do damage, but he does take enemy attention with the raw, and he is kind-hearted, which means that he prioritizes helping other party members, i.e. if I'm being grabbed at the back or grappled by a monster, he's not just going to keep killing the actual, like, main ogre we're fighting. He's going to run over and free me so I can start casting my sorcerer stuff sooner. So, ironically, a tank that is kind-hearted to focus on support really does look after you if that's what you're after, as opposed to doing damage if that's what you're after with straightforward. And then you've got the other two inclinations to look at too. So you can kind of put that together depending on the result you want to create. Do I want a more super-focused DPS dealing machine, or do I maybe want that DPS dealing machine to still, you know, be a team player? And you do really get some fun, interesting results when you start to put that into practice, and it's definitely something to keep in mind. As a general rule, though, if you want your pawn to do as much damage as possible, give it straightforward. If you want it to be as helpful as possible, give it kind-hearted, and then calm and simple are a little bit more niche. In any case, we also then want to touch on the actual specialization that they can have. You learn these by getting friendly with various characters, and then they will teach your pawn them. But, for example, the specialization here is surgeon. So, for example, this specialization means that they will use curatives on everyone, not just themselves. So technically speaking, if you had a full damage pawn, but then gave it this, piled curatives into its inventory, it would double up as a healer, so maybe you could get away with not having a mage. But then you start to get into a little bit more advanced, nuanced stuff, which is sort of beyond the scope of like a day 2 general pawn composition overview guide, so we will touch on that more in detail later. But you can get specializations that make your pawn automatically sort your weight for you, or will gather and combine items. A lot of them aren't incessantly combat focused per se, but between specialization, inclination, and vocation, you can create some rather interesting setups, but warning, results may vary and you can get the opposite effect and accidentally make your pawn kind of awful and useless, so yeah, due consideration. But bottom line undercutting all of that, of course, as I said at the start, you know, whatever you think is going to be fun, do give it a go, but if you're running into trouble, perhaps the answer does lie in not what you are doing or do have, but what you're not doing and what vocation / skill on that vocation is missing. Mages, fighters, warriors with taunts, and everything will be looking peachy. Oh, and generally speaking, if you are going to want damage from pawn 3 and 4, choose something ranged, sorcerer or archer, and that works out because melee does tend to get themselves killed a lot in your big sweeping big boy monster attacks, and that is unfortunate. Being in control yourself as the thief really does tend to produce a lot better results than a thief pawn, for example. In any case, I hope that has helped as a general look at things, as someone who has a lot of time in this game now, and any specific questions, do ask me down below, and I will be sure to answer them. For now then, like if you enjoyed this, subscribe, hit the bell for more, consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.